Hi. For today's artist presentation, I've decided to cover Rinko Kawauchi and her work. Alright, so here's all the definite information on her life before photography I could find. So she was born in Shiga, Japan in 1972, and her first camera was a Canon F1. Um, and as you can tell, not much of her direct background is really available to the public. So in terms of information on her personal life and upbringing, in a lot of ways, that's all there is. But in an interview by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, she had this to say on the topic of childhood. I remember being saved a lot by small things and events when I was little. So when I create my work, I attach great significance to listening to small voices and valuing small things. As we will see later and can see here, a lot of emphasis in her work is placed on capturing small everyday things and transforming them through photography, such as how a landscape is created for this small, delicate frog by filling the frame. I will also note that all the quotes made by the artist past this point are from the interview by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Okay, moving forward. I'll be going over specific inspirations for her projects when we take a closer look at them on their own, but in terms of general interests that can be applied to across the body of her work, I feel this quote sums up a lot of the allure that her work creates. No one can explain what the world is made of. Scientists, physicists, philosophers, etc., etc., have tried to figure out the world's mysteries, and they have their theories, but still there is more unknown than known. Many of Kawauchi's pictures are shot in a way that specific details on location and an exact sense of place are missing, such as with the photo here. It creates abstraction that always brings up the sense of the unknown and makes her photos really intriguing. I especially like the use of negative space here to both highlight the flower's ethereal look and create a sense of mystery. Anyway, continuing back to the quote, I wanted to think about mysteries in this world. Through photography, I'm always focusing on and thinking about these things. Continuing with that sense of the unknown, but the sort of wonder it brings, this photo here is also really effective in that sense, with the extremely low depth of fields making it difficult to distinguish exact features of the eye, lending to the abstraction created by filling the frame and the slight overexposure. And I guess speaking of technical imperfections, forgive me for butchering any pronunciation, the philosophy of wabi-sabi can be seen as the basis of her work. According to the quote, it allows room for mistakes. Applied to photography, the goal is not the perfect photograph, rather expressivity and depth make a picture meaningful, and therein lies the beauty. I think this philosophy finds itself incorporated in all of her work from what I've seen, such is the case with this picture from the river embraced me. There's clear overexposure or possibly a dodge from the bottom left of the photo, but it ends up adding a lot in terms of atmosphere, creating an almost foggy, daydream-like feeling. Something else that is important to note here and going forward is her great use of color. She often uses a mellow, almost pastel-like sort of color palette that to me gives many of her photos, especially those of smaller details and objects, a light sort of delicate and again dreamlike feel. Alright, so really quickly, here's a timeline of her personal projects and their publication. The ones highlighted are those that I'll be going over to close off the presentation. In terms of the accompanying photograph, just like with the magenta and hints of green in the last photo, this one is also balanced well color-wise with the blues and yellows working together to make the scene pop. Also, the obscurity on the left does well to draw the eye to the swing with the lines emerging out. And it does a good job as well of adding to the atmosphere and sense of mystery found across her photos. This photo in particular, though, worries me a bit. Makes me wonder if the person on the swing had things under control, or if the next picture in the contact sheet is a straight-up faceplant. Okay, getting into specific projects, here's one of her earliest and what got her noticed in the contemporary photography scene. The title Utatane, from what I read, was chosen to express a state between sleep and wakefulness, and this project explores these various kinds of liminal states. Talking about the project, she has said, "Describing what dreams do for us is difficult. I think dreams come from our subconscious minds or states of unconsciousness. I'm very much interested in that field, and I get inspired by dreams I have sometimes." Across the next three projects, all of her work, not all of her work really, that motif of dreamlike imagery gets a great deal of exploration. With this photo in particular, thanks to the content and with the bubbles standing out color-wise, but remaining slightly obscured through a blur of some sort over the whole image. Starting here, we also are going to get into how her photos are presented together. In this case, they both share similar shapes, making them feel cohesive, which we'll also see later on. I particularly like the viewpoints with the melon one, creating an almost circular frame for the break in it. And the small head in the palm also feels like something straight out of a dream content-wise. Here the photos feel cohesive together in a number of ways. The greens in the images, with similar shapes in the first, and the markings on the ground in the second, and a shared sense of delicacy between the few fibers held together central to the first one and the second one's bubble. Also I just noticed there's a sense of the scenes mirroring each other, with one of them, they're both the same. They have the same angle but mirrored, so that's pretty neat. Okay, continuing with the dream motif is Ametsuchi. We're out of order timeline-wise with the next project, but I felt this transitioned best from the last. What inspired me was a dream I had one day. It was of scenery so amazingly beautiful that it made me almost scared. I woke up thinking about how beautiful it was. About 6 months later, I saw what I saw in my dream on TV. The location did exist. Another big part of her work in terms of themes, especially in the depiction of the fragility of things from the previous project, is a sort of exploration of the transient nature of life. I think that aspect is explored well in this project, and especially with this photo, with the viewpoint creating a sense of duality between living and not. I would argue, though, that her work isn't looking at this short time alive and impermanence as a grim thing, but showing that these everyday moments become more important because of it. Finally, I'll quickly finish up with one of her projects I think encapsulates all of the things mentioned so far pretty well. From being fine-tuned to the small voices in our world, to adopting the philosophy of wabi-sabi, the latter of which I feel rings particularly true with this image, where the rose being blown out exposure-wise ends up framing it as a sort of light source in the image, giving its small voice more of a weight to it and importance. Similarly here, pairing these images together, at least for me, gives the moment on the right an added sense of importance in the project that it might not have had on its own, with the shared implied line and quality of light between the two. Together they feel very poetic.